Steve doesn't talk about it much here, but in his paper they also look a little bit about whether or not kids are doing internships instead. And those numbers are small, so I think it's pretty compelling that's not what's going on. All right, well, let's kind of roll through some more of these other things that are interesting. How about various minority groups? Well, Harry Holzer from my institution at Georgetown is very interested in the effect of commuting, especially on the differential impacts of labor force participation rates between male and female teens among the African American population. And what he finds is that this commuting disconnect really plays a role for teen males among the African American population. So that if you're living in the central city, getting out to where the jobs are now being created today in the suburbs has become increasingly difficult, and seems to be the spatial mismatch argument seems to play a role for that subpopulation. So again, different subpopulations, I've already talked about women, African American young males. Different things can be playing a role and have different kinds of impacts. Two other things I'm going to come back to what I think is probably an area that needs a lot more research, and that's what's the role of government programs. In this literature, the thing I've been looking at for a long time, and some of us are aware of, is the impact of minimum wage. The generic argument in theory and economics is that what happens when you increase the minimum wage? You crowd teens out, right? Job goes up, employers really can't afford that casual labor as easily as they readily used to do. Now, we had declining or stable relative minimum wages until the late 1990s, and then it started increasing. So that corresponds to some extent with what's going on here. And state by state, it can vary quite a bit. We've also got things like living wages going on that are affecting particular metropolitan labor markets. Does that play a role? Talk about a place where econometrics is really puzzling. This is one of them. By and large, you get different kinds of results depending on how you operationalize the model. I think what the most consensus is that there seems to be an impact that increases unemployment among teens, but it's fairly moderate or modest impact overall. At the same time, this article by Chris Smith, which we referred to by the Federal Reserve, looks specifically at the effect of minimum wage at wage inequality, this donut hole job creation that I was talking about. And he argues that the change in minimum wage was involved with about a third of the change in wage inequality over the last decade or so. So minimum wage plays a role here, and especially for teens, it's a little bit unresolved, but it's important. The Urban Institute, just within the last little bit, has come out with a report that focuses on another area that people are concerned in terms of government intervention, and that's in moving kids from school to work and youth employment programs. So in the late 1990s, the government phased out federal youth employment programs for summer work, and it's estimated that about a 10% of the increase in teen unemployment and teen joblessness is attributable to the lack of these programs. So if you want to push policy levers, you kind of see where I'm going. Here's another one you might want to think about: minimum wage, school-to-work patterns, federal government programs for summer work, whether or not your immigration focus is on the undocumented or the documented. These temporary work programs I have a separate interest in. I'm finishing up a project on that right now. And the growth in temporary work programs has, in fact, been astounding, especially during the last decade. It's been an astounding growth. What role does that play? We simply don't know. We don't really understand it. We just know, as Steve's pointed out, that the numbers are big. So I've got a couple more minutes. I'm going to wrap up. Because one of the things that I notice is a couple of things. In this current recession, increases in teen joblessness has been particularly marked. And employers are saying, if you look at opinion polls, that they're going to hire adults instead because they don't want the teens. The adults can't find jobs. They're more ready to backdrop to these kinds of positions. And that seems to be going on. Over the long run, however, there's two things that I think are really curious. One of which is that if you look since the 1950s at overall teen employment rates, so there's unemployment, there's job employment ratios, there's labor force participation rates, they kind of move in sync or counter to each other. Today, looks a little bit like different points in time, say in the mid-'60s. So what happened in the mid-'60s? Well, you could argue it was the baby boom. A lot of baby boomers were coming of age. They enter the teen labor market. There's a lot of them. They crowd each other out, possibly. But we don't really know. That's an argument. Other than that, the trends today, in some ways, in terms of levels, don't look that different than they did at times in the 1980s. All of which is to say, if you look at the cycles, they're big bumps up and down. So the question is, where are we going to come at the outside of this? Some people are arguing that this recession is going to be good for teen employment bouncing out because it's going to discipline youth. They're going to learn they're going to have to work hard to keep these jobs if they want them. And that indeed is what has happened in past recessions. But the other thing which you can kind of see in Steve's table, if you look back at his, it's a table in his appendix. The largest share of workers in many of these so-called teen jobs are neither immigrants or teens, they're adults. And one of the things seems to be going on, certainly in this recession you see it clearly, is the employment of adults in formerly teen jobs or in teen employment. And it gets back to this donut hole economy we're talking about, the creation of low-end jobs and high-end jobs. There seems to be something going on, and this echoes a little bit, I think, what Professor Scott was saying in different ways. We seem to be seeing a restructuring of the economy going on in a little way that's preferring some native workers, in some case second-generation workers, to work in these teen employment areas. And that's, I think, in some ways an equally disturbing thought to the impact of immigration. So, just to recap, I tend to believe these results. I've also tried to point out a whole host of other areas and factors that people are looking at to try to explain the phenomenon, and to keep in mind that the solutions are probably multiple at the same time.
Okay, Lindsay, just a quick point of clarification, if I may. When you were talking about Chris Smith's study and his conclusions on the role of immigrant workers in the reduction of labor force participation by native youth, I think at one point you said the range that Smith found was between 1/3 and a half, and the second time you said between 1/3 and a fifth.
Right, you mean half.
1/3 and a half.
1/3 and a half, okay.